Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm King Williams, and I'm your host of the Neighborhood Watch podcast. And so it's been a while since we've done one of these great video interviews, and we're actually starting off with an old friend from the podcast who's going to be joining us for this new interview that we've done. This is our first one since the pandemic has actually started, and I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone's thoughts on what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about real estate in Atlanta from three very different vantage points, and I'm really excited to have the three individuals that is going to be talking to us about all aspects of Atlanta and things you may not have known. And so we got a lot of questions before this interview started, and so I'm going to ask them. And so I really hope that you enjoy it. And if you haven't already, wherever you heard this podcast or viewed this podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to it and tell a friend about it. So again, this is the Neighborhood Watch podcast, and I'm your host, King Williams. All right, and so today we're talking about real estate in Atlanta. And so we've got one old friend of the podcast coming back, and we have two new ones as well. And so I'm talking to three people who I really believe are industry leaders and industry pioneers in a lot of regards about Atlanta real estate. And so we're going to talk from three different vantage points, one of which is the hospitality industry, one of which is the commercial side, and another one is going to be the residential side. And so I have three guests with me. First is Devon Reeves. The next one is Cedric Matheny. Thank you all for coming back, and thank you for T. Dallas Smith for allowing us to be at your headquarters. And then we have Patrick Henderson. And so all three, and he's coming from the residential background, but high-end residential. And so we've seen a lot in all three aspects of this in Atlanta over the last couple of years. And it's rare to get three people of this caliber in one room at one time. And so I'm looking forward to this interview first, but before we get into it, I would like for you all to just introduce yourselves to the people at home who are going to be listening or watching to this.
Yes, hello. My name is Devon Reeves. Thank you so much for bringing me on the show. I'm happy to be here. I've been in the hospitality industry for over 14 years. So I'm a hotel investor, asset manager, and fund manager. I actually got my start off as a front desk agent at the Hyatt Regency in Atlanta. So I've been in the industry here in Atlanta. I've been in Atlanta for over 20 years. So I guess I can say I'm a peach now.
Okay.
But thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to this great conversation.
All right. And a returning guest, Cedric. Cedric, I will say though, before we get into this, one of our most replied to episodes of the podcast in particular, so I'm really surprised about that one. Not because Cedric wasn't good, it was a surprise because a lot of people, just to be honest, was like, hey, I didn't know black people were in commercial real estate. And so I had to have Cedric come back, and I'm glad he came back. And so Cedric, thank you for coming back, and can you explain to people what you do?
Sure. I'm Cedric Matheny, Principal and Vice President at T. Dallas Smith & Company. We are the largest African-American-owned commercial real estate firm in the country that specializes in tenant representation and in corporate real estate services. So again, happy to be here again. Happy to share with my friend Patrick, who I've been known for a long time, and I just met this beautiful young lady right here as well, who's also a Georgia State alum. So go Panthers.
All right. And our last guest is a new friend of the podcast. We have Patrick Henderson here. Patrick is one of the few, I'm not going to say few, but he's one of the leaders in high-end residential real estate in Atlanta. And it's very unusual, to be honest, to see someone who is black in that space. And so I'm glad that Patrick took some time out today to come and talk to us, because he's going to give us a different vantage point on what it means to be someone who's working in high-end residential development in Atlanta. So Patrick, can you tell people what you do?
Sure. My name is Patrick Henderson. I work in the high-end modern real estate market here in the Atlanta area. We do modern development homes in the metro area and some of the outskirts as well. So thank you for allowing me to be here.
All right, now, thank you all for doing this. And so the reason why, the elephant in the room is COVID is the reason why a lot of us have been distant from everyone. And in particular, COVID has affected all of our businesses. But for you in particular, Devon, somebody who's in hospitality, just how has COVID been for you on that side? Because you do a lot of work in hospitality, and for a lot of people, COVID has shut down their business completely. So what has COVID been like for you over the last 15 months?
So over the last, my story during COVID is a little different. And the reason why it's different, because I actually acquired a hotel during COVID. So sometimes some people actually equate the hospitality, the hotel industry to the real estate industry in 2008, right? There are a lot of hotels that had to close down. There are a lot of hotels that occupancy levels We're like, you know, at unforeseen levels below 20%, 30%, 50%. And some hotel owners, essentially, even seasoned hotel owners, had to essentially give their hotels back to the bank. And we came across a great opportunity to actually acquire property. So again, story's a little different. Now, the other parts of the industry didn't have that great time, right? Again, a lot of hotels closed, a lot of restaurants had to close, a lot of business models had to pivot. Even a lot of major hotels in downtown Atlanta had to close. Hotels, iconic hotels had to close. Even my hotel, the Hyatt Regency Atlanta, or my former hotel, had to close down. That's one of the largest, second largest hotels in Atlanta. The Marriott Marquis in Atlanta, that stayed open. But can you imagine a hotel over 1,600 rooms, you know, reaching occupancy levels, which is below, you know, 20%. And so what that means for those who don't understand, just give you an example. If you have a hotel that's 100 rooms and 50 rooms or those are occupied, that's 50%. So can you imagine if a big box hotel or a larger hotel that's 1,600, 1,200 rooms, they can't stay open. You know, it takes more to keep it open. So that's why they just have to keep it closed, because a lot of business and a lot of these, Atlanta is a convention market, right? And so it was a lot of corporate travel. And so a lot of these hotels had to close down, or a lot of business were closed off the books, because this was worse than the recession of 2008. And I actually, you know, was working, even in school, during the recession in 2008. And it was bad, but it wasn't as bad as this, right? Like I said before, hotels were closing, corporate business was stopping, because the first thing, typically what happens when it's an economic downturn, the first thing that's cut is business travel. That's the first thing, right? Corporate, first thing that's cut. And so they can't travel, and that's what literally brings a lot of business to the hotels in Atlanta. So essentially it decimated the industry, and then therefore people can't travel. It was a lockdown. People couldn't eat in restaurants, right? They couldn't eat inside. They had to do a lot of to-go orders. And some restaurants, it didn't make sense from a cost perspective to even do to-go orders. So they had to close down. And so now fast forward, you know, 15, 18 months later, you know, hotels are now reopening. This past weekend, the hotel industry in Atlanta, the rates were north of $200 a night, which is great for the industry. It's bad for consumers. I'm sure people don't want to pay that, but from a hotelier, that's good. And some of the hotels were sold out. You could not find a room in Atlanta, because it was sold out last weekend because of the fight. But the point I'm trying to make is that the leisure market is coming back, meaning, for those who don't know what leisure is, that means that, you know, people are just traveling if they want to go see the aquarium or if they just want to visit the city. So leisure is starting to come back. We're still missing that corporate business again, because business travelers aren't really traveling as much. But as far as the COVID, I mean, just like any other industries, but it definitely hurt the hospitality industry the most. Hospitality is responsible for 1 out of the 4 jobs, 1 out of the 8 jobs in the economy. And during COVID, we lost over 500,000 jobs. And now, you know, folks who were eating at restaurants or staying at hotels, they're not able to get that same level of service that they received prior to COVID. And that's because it's very hard for folks to come back to work. Some folks are, you know, they're receiving unemployment benefits, and which is higher than a lot of costs, or they're just unable to find jobs. So again, travel is back. The bad news is we can't find employees to help to meet the demand, not only in restaurants, but in hotels as well.
Okay, and thank you for that. And so then, Cedric, I want to ask you in particular, you coming from the commercial real estate world, how has COVID affected your business over the last 15 months?
Sure. I'll answer it in the form of a story. I think the last time I was on Watch the Hood, it was like, we were just talking about this. It was 2 weeks before COVID actually hit, and we was literally having this podcast, and 2 weeks later, COVID hit. For our particular business, business didn't stop, it ramped up. Particularly because one of our largest clients, Microsoft, we were really in the heat of getting the deal done, bringing them here to Atlanta. And we ended up getting that deal done in May of 2020, right in the midst of COVID. And it was the largest deal done in the United States, 523,000 square feet, office here in Atlantic Station, and then we turned around and did purchase 90 acres for them on the west side of Atlanta, all during COVID. So from my experience is a little different than, I guess, my peers, because everybody's family and personal situation was different. It affected people differently. But for T. Dallas Smith Company, we really ramped up. We worked, and we were fortunate. We were really fortunate that COVID didn't stop a company like Microsoft from coming to Atlanta, because a lot of companies paused. And I got a lot of peers in the industry that just was like, all the deals, I was 90% done with a deal, and it just basically moved away from the table because we didn't know what this COVID was going to do for their business. So that definitely kind of kept us uneasy, but we just stayed focused and just kind of just listened to our client and got the deal done. In addition to that, we had other clients that were coming to us for advice. Large corporations asking us, hey, what are you guys seeing? What does the end look like, in the office market or industrial market? What is the future workspace is going to work going forward? And we're still having those conversations. There are some companies that are now making decisions and doing kind of hybrid work schedules where people are coming in the office 2 or 3 days a week, some not at all. So that's still in process. So what's changed in our industry for COVID, not only am I doing commercial real estate work, we're kind of stepping into HR a little bit and advising on how companies manage their workforce. Who stays, what positions are in the office, what positions are at home. Is there medical situations where it causes them to stay at home and not be around folks? So it's a lot of that going on. So for us, COVID, we picked up some more business during COVID. So again, we just were blessed during COVID, and it was kind of a weird situation to be in, kind of seeing the turmoil going on, because not only did you have COVID, and I don't want to bring this up, but you had the situation that everybody just heard about, the conviction of Derek Chauvin with George Floyd and everything that happened, the social unrest. So 2020 was a very unique year all around across the board, and I think that overall we're going to come out better for it, if that makes sense. I think we're coming into a new way of life, so to speak, and cognizance of our surroundings and people, and so I'm just interested. I'm excited. I'm excited about what's going on and what's happening. So that's my take on COVID.
Okay, and then Patrick, for you in particular, while you're in residential real estate, you're in the high end of it, and so there's been a lot of stories about what's been happening in the residential space. But what's been happening for you and your business as it relates to COVID?
Sure. So with the pandemic that took place, our business, from a residential real estate perspective, has, grown leaps and bounds. More people are spending more time at home as opposed to being, away from their home and their establishment. So even from the high-end residential market, people are doing things to their houses that they just put off from doing previously. So you have people now really concentrating on that outdoor living space, where we're talking about pools being done, large gazebos, lanais, things of that nature. So the market has grown. We've had an increase of people trying to buy new houses. So we're doing a lot of new construction projects, and it hasn't slowed down. I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. The adverse effect to that, though, has been dealing with the pricing, pricing for materials, availability of materials, even from the standpoint of availability of labor, because everybody is just busy. A lot of the factories where we get our materials from are, had to do cutbacks because people just weren't coming in. And so it has taken longer for materials to, be developed in factories, where you may had window orders that could take 4 to 6 weeks, you're up to 90 days. In that case, in terms of getting materials from windows, concrete, there's rationing out of concrete right now. Lumber prices are through the roof. So the cost to build those houses are more, but more people are taking that cash flow and actually putting it into their homes.
Okay. And I think the through line between all three of these stories are you guys have managed to have success during the pandemic, which is a rare occurrence, and you managed to do it in Atlanta. And so I want to ask all three of you is, Has being in Atlanta been an advantageous thing to have as regards to everything, especially with your businesses and especially during COVID? Has being in Atlanta been an advantage to having the success that you've had so far?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, my hotel that we acquire is in Oklahoma, so it's not in Atlanta. But I will say the relationships that I formed, Georgia State, actually came across the deal from a connection that I made while I was at Georgia State. So even though the deal necessarily isn't in Atlanta, the investors that I actually brought in, they're not from Atlanta, because everything was done virtual, right? So as Cedric mentioned before, a lot of the deals, during COVID, they were pretty much 85 to 90%, almost to completion or get declared to close, and COVID pretty much stopped it, right? Like, no, the market is too uncertain. So, but as far as me being in Atlanta, it didn't really change anything. I became more still. I have a 2-year-old, so I was able to be more present with him. I was able to really, like I said, become more still and become just with some of the most amazing ideas and initiatives that I developed, and just building and maintaining relationships that I built during Atlanta and keeping those relationships. Because a lot of times with people, what they did during COVID, they didn't really deal with people, right? Meaning they didn't, because it was either they dealt with people or they didn't virtually. So I was able to build more relationships virtually, maintain the relationships that I did have in person virtually. But being in Atlanta, it didn't make a break. I'm glad that I was in Atlanta because I was home and I had friends and family. But again, that relationship, if I wouldn't have been in Atlanta, meaning if I didn't go to Georgia State University, so go Panthers, shout out. If I didn't go to Georgia State University and build those relationships that I did have within the hospitality community, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today about acquiring a property during COVID when a lot of other people couldn't get the clear to close to actually acquire a hotel.
And for fellas, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add. I think being in Atlanta was very important. Obviously from having a client like Microsoft was very important. And I always tell folks Atlanta is a very unique place compared to your other major MSAs in the United States. There's no other place like Atlanta in terms of diversity, particularly Black folk, in different areas and walks of life. From a political standpoint, from a wealth standpoint, from just a business community. Atlanta's very unique in terms of just the people of color that are doing things. And the relationships that you have, that Black folks can build here in Atlanta, in my opinion, are just superior to other metro cities around the United States. And I've been to a lot of them, and I've always come back home to the same thing. I was like, man, they ain't doing it like Atlanta. From our culture to the relationships, like you can come here, our relationships help bring Microsoft here, our relationships with the state, relationships with the city, relationships in the business community and the local communities. We have relationships there with people that look like us, that understood what we were trying to do and helped us kind of get things across the goal line. So Atlanta was very important last year for me.
Patrick?
In my market, Atlanta has been, it's been very advantageous being here. I'm a native of California, and what I found is that a lot of my peers, not only from California, but all across the country, have moved here to the Atlanta area. And with that being said, they're looking for homes. And so more and more people have said that they wanted to relocate here. They are building these, mega mansions, which is similar to what they would pay, for in California. They're paying a fraction of the cost here. And so it made sense for that to take place. So, what I'm finding is a lot of people coming in from California, DC, New York, even coming up from Florida. And we've been able to service that clientele, as well as those who are just native from Georgia, and really being able to give them something that will be long lasting. So it's been great. You also have the movie industry that is here. And, people are looking for places to get out of the mainstream studios to do filming, and they're coming to a lot of our homes that we're doing development on. And so it has just been a very great time for us from a residential real estate perspective.
Well, no, I'm glad you all have had the success, and I'm glad Atlanta has helped and contribute to that. But there is another side of Atlanta that I do want to ask you all about, which is there's two things in particular that have risen a lot over COVID. One of which is the topic of gentrification, and the other one is affordable housing. And so I want to first start with the conversation about affordable housing because it's a very different conversation in many ways than the one about gentrification. And so for all of you, one of the things a lot of people are asking about Atlanta going forward is Atlanta affordable? And if it's not, why is it not affordable? And so I want to start with Patrick first on this one, which is, can you explain from a developer side why a house may not be affordable? And I know that's not necessarily your avenue, but can you explain more about the developer side of the affordable housing debate?
So right now, there's an abundance need of affordable housing here in the Atlanta market. However, the cost to develop such a product right now is becoming astronomical. When you're talking about, the materials cost from the lumber to the concrete, it's even gone down to sheetrock as well as, gutters. The cost is, doubled and tripled in some cases. And so building an affordable product is not always able to be done unless you're doing from a mass production perspective. You have your large builders who are doing your mass production, so therefore they can spread that cost across multiple builds. And so I do see that there is a space there, but the cost can be prohibitive in some cases for that.
Okay. And so I'm going to open up for both of you, but I want to actually go with Davon next because a lot of people are saying that maybe Airbnb in particular is not only affecting the hotel industry, but is also affecting our affordable housing stock. So I want to start with you, Davon, first, and I'll go back to you, Patrick. How has Airbnb affected your business? And then Patrick, on your end as well.
Before I answer the Airbnb, you mentioned about, affordable housing and making it affordable. 10 years, so I moved to Boston from Atlanta in, I think, 2015, I believe 2014, and it was still relatively affordable. When I came back in 2017, it was the prices went sky high, but Patrick just talked about folks moving from New York, Chicago, Florida, California, where those prices, Boston, where those prices were typically a lot higher, right? Cost of living is a lot higher. So it's more affordable to come to Atlanta. So now it's more of a demand, and now we can increase prices because before Atlanta was the place to come. People would either retire from up north or they, come here to move, and they're able to get, a larger house for a fraction of the cost of what they're paying for in other cities, which is essentially driving up the cost, right? So that's one thing. And the thing about the second point, as far as for Airbnb, so Airbnb is definitely a disruptor to the hospitality industry. That's just they're even evaluated more than I think 3 of the major hotel companies combined, but yet they have no buildings that they actually own, right? There's more of a platform. So they definitely it's a threat, but it's more so it's a threat depending on the community, right? So where my hotel is in Oklahoma, Airbnb or short-term rental is not necessarily a threat, right? Because people aren't really traveling for one, Uber and Lyft aren't even available in El Reno, right? So typically, no one's really traveling there for leisure. They're just doing it for work, and they're going to stay at a hotel. But you have markets like Atlanta, San Francisco, New York, who people that the hotel rooms are a little bit higher, or people, they want that experience. So some folks, it makes more sense if they have a family or if they want to create an experience, they want to bring a private chef, they may not be able to do that at a hotel, so they possibly can do that at Airbnb. But as far as Airbnb, as far as the cost, or that's going back to the affordable housing, or that's taken away from affordable housing because people, they want to have that experience, so they want to buy a modern build, right? And so they want to either rent it out or turn it into an Airbnb because they're able to, one, they want to make a profit, of course, but two, they want to create that experience. But then again, that's taken away from affordable housing for someone who could necessarily come in and rent it at affordable price. So hopefully that answers the question. I mean, hospitality, as far as with Airbnb and affordable housing, is just more so. Airbnb, like I said, is here to stay, But as far as it's just giving another experience, and it's just taken away from the cost. So as far as the conversation is just more so dependent on the market, right? And so now there's legislation that's in place because to make sure that Airbnb, as far as, you know, any regulations that they have or any taxes that they have compared, because hotels, of course, were upset about it. So, but as far as, you know, in my opinion, it's not necessarily too much of a threat as it was before. It's just a threat like an online agency is just something that is just here to stay in the hospitality industry. We just deal with it, work together, because some hotels are even using Airbnb to market their rooms.
All right, so Patrick, I want to ask you in particular, how the Airbnb conversation. So how does that affect affordable housing?
So when you look at the whole thing versus hotels versus Airbnb, the affordable housing from an Airbnb perspective, there's a way to do it. Again, most investors or most people now are taking their housing and instead of doing that long-term rental, they're putting it on Airbnb. However, they can utilize it as a way to share or split some of the money that they would pay to a mortgage company or a rental. So therefore, if you have a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom or what have you, they can stay in part of the house while they're still renting portions of that out. So even from a high-end market, what I'm finding is that people are taking their personal home and they're renting out rooms, they're renting out the garage that they've converted into a room, et cetera. So there's a way to kind of split that. So the same thing can happen in the affordable housing market. People can take that 3-bedroom house and during the weekends, they can rent it out as an Airbnb. So there's ways of doing anything. You just have to be creative in order to make it happen. What I have found though is that people are no longer doing, well, it's case by case, obviously, but a lot of people are opting to go to Airbnb as opposed to your long-term rentals because with the moratorium, people are not having to pay, you know, their rent. And so therefore, you as a homeowner still have to pay that to the mortgage company. And so that's why people have transitioned over to that short-term rental because they know that they can still get their money in order to make that payment, essentially.
And so now I want to ask Cedric your thoughts on affordable housing.
Sure. So affordable housing, I have a few things, and I'm gonna go back to what you asked about Atlanta. Metro Atlanta encompasses 29 counties that go outside that go outside the 285 perimeter. That's really Metro Atlanta. So when I think about affordable housing, I think about Metro Atlanta. If you're in the city core, obviously prices are gonna be a little bit higher. But as you move out to the suburbs, depending on where you're going, the housing get a little cheaper. So if you're a person or with a family or whatever the case may be, and you're looking for affordable housing, you have a small family, the trend typically is, if I have small kids, I'm probably going to move to the suburbs just because of the school systems, and the houses are bigger and they're just cheaper. So I think the affordable housing problem, typically when we talk about it, we talk about really a small core of the city. If you really think about it from a square mile standpoint. The conversation is really around kind of anything inside the 285 perimeter in terms of Atlanta. So that's one thing. The other thing is, when I think about affordable housing, I think about it twofold. You have affordability of homes, and then you have affordable housing. Affordable housing meaning for rent product, or affordability meaning for purchase product, right? And I feel like even though in this market, and as he can attest to, it's on fire right now. You know, people are literally bidding on homes. In order to acquire homes. And that's due to the supply. There's a very low shortage of supply of homes right now, which is affecting the affordability of homes. And that's just simple economics, it's supply and demand. And that's not something that could be fixed with policies alone. We need more people like Patrick to build more homes, to get more supply out there. And the problem with getting the supply out there, back to Patrick's point, is the cost. You know, so in order to make the numbers work, you're gonna have to do large-scale, affordable housing development. So I don't know if you remember back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a lot of spec homes that were built like in Clayton County. And these are and I call them stick homes because the materials that they're using, these homes are, you know, they're stick. I mean, they can build these homes little in like what, you would tell me, like 4 or 5 months, 8 months. And, you know, and they're siding houses, you know, they're on a concrete slab. Those houses are very easy to build. But in order to make the numbers work, it's got to be a large scale development, and you got to sell the parcels. So there's a lot of strategies around how to do it. But again, the numbers have to make sense, because the numbers have to make sense. So that's that. And then the question about Airbnb, who's also a client of ours, trying to get to Atlanta, so we're helping them out with that as well. To his point, I look at Airbnb as a business opportunity for folks that are trying to invest in real estate, and that's another, I guess, variable of what's affecting affordable housing, and it'll probably be a good segue to the next. We're talking about gentrification, because you have a lot of investors that are buying houses for rent, for Airbnbs, or for flips. My personal opinion is house flippers. When you have a lot of house flippers, that drives up price. It drives up the price, especially in a market like today's market, where there's a big demand for housing. There's big wide margins, and it also causes a little concern for me, long term. So those are kind of my 2 cents there.
Right, and so you kind of went into the gentrification part of it, and we had a great interview the first time about gentrification in Atlanta, and so I want to start with you first because we started about it. My question is going to be a little different from you than it is from the other two, which is, based on what we've talked about so far, is there a real solution to gentrification in Atlanta going forward?
Is there a real solution to gentrification? That is a loaded question. There is not a real solution. There's many solutions, depending on the circumstances. That's how I answer that question. And the answer, really, it depends on what's going on in the market, right? Like, for example, Microsoft acquired 90 acres in Quarry Yards. When that news hits the street, the first people that's going to gobble up real estate are investors, okay? From all walks of life. You got big hedge funds involved in the game now. Institutional players are they're acquiring lots of residential properties. Me, Patrick, and Ms. Reeves here, we don't have the kind of money as an institutional investor. We can't compete with that kind of money. You know what I mean? We're not competing with institutional investors buying property. That's an issue. However, I think it's a balanced approach. For an example, if there's an old lady that's been in the community for 20, 30 years, has owned their property, obviously property taxes will go up. I think there should be that's a policy discussion. There should be some policy in place where that individual's property taxes are frozen for a period of years, or whatever the case may be, or forgiven, however they want to do it. They should not be displaced based on property taxes. I strongly believe that. Now, on the flip side of that, if you got some homeowners that they're not being responsible homeowners, which you have a lot of those, they're just not responsible homeowners, but they see activity happening now, and all of a sudden now they want to say, well, they're pushing out the community when you weren't really trying to be in the community in the first place. So there's a lot of different narratives that are happening all at once, and there isn't a one-size solution for everybody. But I think the number one solution, in my opinion, is education. It's educating the community members about what's going on, what's happening, how can you take an advantage of this situation economically? Because one thing is for sure, when you invest in real estate, you want a return, even as a homeowner. So if your home increased 100%, now you got $200,000 in equity, now the question is, what are your options? Now you have options that you didn't have before. So whether you're going to sell it, take your money, go do something else, go whatever, you want to retire, or do you want to take the money, buy your next door neighbor's home? Now you got an investment business. I mean, there's so much. The conversation, I feel like, is more financial literacy in the community of how do you take advantage of gentrification rather than the cons of gentrification, because the real business people take advantage of it, and they take advantage of the market. So we got to, in our community specifically, we got to learn how to take advantage of market dynamics like our counterparts do.
And so I want to ask you, especially Patrick, on your thoughts of that.
So I agree exactly what you said, Cedric, especially about the education standpoint. That is one of the reasons why, I have a series that I do. I have a series called the Launch Your Learning Circle. And what that is coined to not only help investors how to get involved in the real estate market, but it's really helped them go and really buy the block, really going into certain areas and put homeowners in some of these houses and really transform the community, not necessarily displace the community. It also works on the high-end market because a lot of our counterparts are going into some of these higher-end areas that I do development in, and we're bringing more people of color into some of those areas where we traditionally wouldn't be. And we're putting these high-end homes there, and we're coming into that area and really putting in a nice product of homeowners and not necessarily just investors. So there's ways to battle gentrification, but education is the number one thing to really educate not only the buyers that are coming into the area, but also to educate the homeowners that are already there and how they can actually stay in their home, how they can buy the home that they're living in, that they may be renting. How do we improve the community from a retail and commercial standpoint? It's really education all the way around the board.
Right, and now I want to open up the conversation about Atlanta, right? So we know Atlanta is a hot market, but there's a couple regions that people want to really know a lot more about. And so one of which is, first starting out with you, Cedric, is the West Side. And so the West Side is in the news a lot. So what's been going on the West Side of Atlanta, and what should people be aware of?
Well, obviously, the campus of Microsoft is coming soon. I don't know when. But the west side of Atlanta it's really picked up steam. Let's kind of give you a little history lesson of the west side of Atlanta. Historically, the west side of Atlanta has been basically an underserved community, underserved black community for a very long time. Drugs, gangs, you name it. That's been the history of the west side of Atlanta. But prior to that, if you ask Dallas, if Dallas was here, he would tell you he grew up in that community, and it was a thriving community at that time when he grew up there, and it was separated by the railroad tracks. And if on one side of the railroad tracks was black folks, on the other side it was white folks. So it was always a segregated community. Over time, you had that white flight and all that stuff happen. So what you have now is a resurgence, and I call it a correction, not really a resurgence. Because if you really think about real estate, right, the first thing they teach you in real estate, what's the number one thing in real estate? Is location, location, location. So I think we're getting back to real estate fundamentals. So that's first of all. If you look at the location of West Atlanta, West End, just where it's located, it's prime real estate. It's prime real estate. And so you've had folks that bought there in the 90s and 2000s betting that eventually people are going to see the value in this location. And that's what you're seeing right now. So that's what Microsoft sees. That's what a lot of companies see. You see Midtown has really exploded, right? And there's only so much you can put in a particular market, right? So now you got to expand. So now we're pushing, now we got this new thing called West Midtown. I ain't never heard of West Midtown in my entire life until like 3 years ago. I never knew there was a West Midtown. I just knew it was a Midtown. So now there's a West Midtown, and that's part of that whole changing the narrative thing that's happening. So as West Midtown develops, everything's gonna push. And I think I said this in the last podcast as well. The late, great Herman Russell made the statement. He said, buy it when it's ugly in the inevitable path of growth. Buy it when it's ugly in the inevitable path of growth. If you do that, you'll never lose. And that's what's happening on the west side. Obviously, there's a lot of prices have increased in the area, but I'm thankful to the West Side Future Fund and the Arthur Blank Foundation for what they did when Mercedes-Benz got there. There's some stuff still, things there that people don't necessarily agree with, but I think in the long run, it will be good for everybody. They put a lot of programs in place to get people jobs, because the real issue is money. Let's just cut to the chase. The real issue is money. It's not housing. It's not any of that. It's money. Because if people have money, then at the end of the day, they can make better decisions.
Money in the mindset.
Money in the mindset. And it goes back to what we said earlier: financial literacy and education. Because we got to figure out how to get people paid and get people good paying jobs, and not just jobs. Learn how to make money themselves. And real estate is a way to do that. And people do it all the time. So, back to your question about the West, I'm getting out of track a little bit, but it's going to grow. I mean, it's going to continue to grow. It's a hot market right now. The Atlanta Beltline has really transformed Atlanta as they've developed that Beltline, because traffic has been an issue for quite some time, and giving people alternate modes of transportation around this Beltline. It just makes a lot of sense going into the next couple of decades. What's Atlanta going to look like, right? And I think that Beltline is really going to be the catalyst of what we're going to see.
And I'm open for both of you all. What have you guys been seeing on the west side or other parts of Atlanta as well?
So I got two areas that I really concentrate in. The North Decatur areas where I really see a huge resurgence. Emory Healthcare has done quite a few purchases. They've taken over DeKalb Medical, and with that, you see an abundance of people flooding to a already thriving area. But you have a lot of infrastructure. I look at it as in terms of infrastructure, in terms of how areas grow or thrive. Part of the problem that we find in some of our areas that are not doing so well is the lack of infrastructure, lack of, community services, lack of proper schools, and then retail. A lot of times when people go and look at places to go shop, the type of grocery stores. And that's where I do a lot of my development is that I follow certain chains. I follow the Home Depots, the Lowe's, I follow the Walmarts, I follow the Publix, things of that nature. I follow the Targets. And that's how I really determine where I want to do development at. But some of the areas in the south of the city is lacking of that. And so as we start to, work with you guys in terms of putting, more commercial infrastructure in those areas, we'll start to see those areas thrive. Because like you said, once you have an abundance of people in one area, you have to expand somewhere. So why not do it, in certain areas that are underserved?
My counterparts here just pretty much answered everything. But I mean, I currently live on the west side and have an investment property on the west side. And I didn't grow up in Atlanta, I grew up in Clayton County. But I went to school, at Georgia State. And so just seeing how Atlanta's transformed, and like you mentioned, now, just going out to, Sandy Springs and to the West End, seeing modern, apartment homes now in the West End, seeing the retail, seeing a lot of different communities. So definitely going to see an uptick, even near the Bankhead area. I was driving near, Donald E. Homes now. Hollowell, excuse me. I was in the Bankhead area and, starting to see modern built apartment homes. 10 years ago, who would have thought that? You know what I mean? Who would have thought, as you mentioned before, gangs, drugs infested, just really a lot of low income communities. And now, so we're starting to see a change, right? And as you mentioned before, we can't compete with these institutional investors, with these hedge funds who literally can come in and literally not only buy the block, but buy miles and miles and miles of the blocks, and they're paying for it in cash. Right? And then going back to that lack of education, where if someone says, here, I'll give you $100,000 for your house, and in your mind you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm rich. But really, you lack that education. You don't realize that if you would hold on to that house, years from now, your house will be worth 10 times more. So literally you take the cash, you run and go where, and then you spend it all, within a certain time frame. And you're losing equity. You're not able to transfer that wealth, to your family and future generations. So I definitely agree with the lack of education, and because even if you bring in communities, I've seen communities where they do as much as they possibly can to help the communities, to help get them jobs, to help them get the education, but it goes with the mindset. They have to be able to receive it. They have to be able to think of abundance. They have to be able to think outside of what their normalcy. Like sometimes it's a mindset of poverty, and they can't see any way out of it. So we can give them all the tools and resources and everything we can, but until we able to have that conversation and really change that mindset and keep it within the community, that's when we go from there.
And I'll add one other point from a corporate real estate standpoint, and working with Microsoft on the Microsoft project, which we're still working on. One of the things that we do as a firm, and we're talking to companies like Microsoft and others that want to invest into communities like West Atlanta, and I take my hat off to Microsoft and their approach. They took a community approach first, versus this is what we're going to do. This is what we want. They said, no, we want to listen to community first. So what they did was they went out and met with the Grove Park Foundation, they met with the Westside Future Fund, they met with folks at the city, the communities, and these are ongoing conversations. Atlanta Police Foundation, Atlanta Fire and Rescue. They want to know what's making the city work and how can we make an impact and create jobs and really impact the community, and not just come in here and just be a tenant. We're not just trying to be a tenant. We want to be a real player. And so that's a mind shift in itself from a corporate standpoint of how companies make decisions going forward. Same thing exercise we're doing with Airbnb. They want to make an impact. They don't want to just come in and be a tenant in the city and just have some jobs. They want to come in like, no, we want to know about the community. How can we support it? What are the needs of the community? Because that's really, at the end of the day, the business community is really a big solver to the gentrification issue. If you get these big companies, big corporations with large pockets to make the necessary investments and not just look at just their silos, and they can actually impact more. And so that is the discussions that we're having on an ongoing basis, and that's what's happening on the west side of Atlanta.
Right, and so as we're wrapping up, I have one question I ask all of you all, and just want to make sure. There's always something I want to ask all of my guests. I'm going to ask you now, which is, what is one thing about your industry that people misconstrue that you would like to correct?
Oh. Well, hotels is actually a form of real estate. A lot of people don't realize that. Like, they don't. Like, people don't think, like, it's mind-boggling. Like, people don't think that they can actually own a hotel. So I get a lot of African Americans, they're like, wait, you can own a hotel? I'm like, yeah, it's an operating business sitting on real estate. So it is a part of commercial real estate. It's one of the sectors.
I call them food groups.
You call them what?
Food groups.
Food groups?
Food groups of commercial real estate.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say retail. Some people call it retail. But yes, so that's a misconception. A lot of people don't realize that. So when they think about expanding or diversifying their real estate portfolio, some people, they think of, multifamily and office and mixed use, but they forget to add hotels to their real estate portfolio.
One thing I would like that people misconstrue with commercial real estate, we don't sell houses. I can't tell you how many times people say, oh yeah, T. Dallas Smith Company, you guys do what again? You sell houses, do housing development? We do not do any housing at all, just office, industrial, and land, and we represent corporations. That's the biggest thing I would like to correct.
One thing I'd like to correct is that people think that development or real estate is easy to do and you don't have to work. People got to understand that it's just like if you want to leave your 9 to 5 to get into the real estate industry, sometimes you're working more hours. You're dealing with tenants, you're dealing with contractors, you're dealing with suppliers, and real estate takes a lot of work, and it is not a get rich quick scenario. Yeah, it takes dedication, it takes time, it takes diligence, it takes being able to, manage so many different aspects of the build. And so just don't get into it thinking that, hey, I got some money, I'm going to invest in it, and I'm going to make a ton of more. It doesn't work that way. It's going to, it takes work, and it takes time.
Okay. And thank you all for taking out your time today to talk to me about this. And I really appreciate you all. And so the very final question I have for all of you, and it's the question I ask all my guests, I'm going to ask you now, is what's making you happy?
One of the things that makes me happy is to take a project and something that nobody wanted, or a piece of raw land, and to be able to, when I turn that project over to the new homeowner and the look on their face, the appreciation that they have, it makes all of the minutia worth it. Because when I get into a project, I try to cancel out the noise, I get heads down and try to make it happen. And the delivery is one of the things that really, really intrigues me. And I like the hustle and bustle. I'm from California, so we're used to the fast pace. So, I call it organized chaos. But I really like, the delivery portion at the end, the reveal.
What makes me happy? My family makes me happy, and not just my at-home family, my work family. We got a group of just young folks that look like me. And I see, when I see them kind of getting it and doing things, it makes me really happy to see someone else being successful at this thing called commercial real estate, because it took a lot of ups and downs and a lot of fails, and we were just talking about this before we did this, that it took a lot to get where I'm at, and if I'm able to kind of bring up someone else and teach them, I want to be able to pour into someone else. That makes me happy to see they got it. They're taking what I'm saying and they're doing it. So that makes me happy.
Real quick, another component that really gives me joy with what I do, it kind of piggybacks off of what you have, because we have a huge educational component that's tied to my company. And what I found is there are a lot of people that get involved in real estate that they don't really have somebody to talk to. They don't have a mentor. They don't have anybody that can help tell them the mistakes that they're making so they can learn from my mistakes. And so with our learning series, our masterclass that we do, it allows me to be able to take somebody up underneath my wing and really say, hey, listen, this is where I went wrong. And this is how you can make sure you avoid that. I do that especially with our college programs that we've started. We've taken in some interns from HBCUs, and my goal is to really train a lot of the HBCUs from a real estate perspective, and train a lot of the students. So I have people coming in from Tuskegee and other universities that are trying to get into the real estate space, and to see that they are taking it all in and they're really absorbing it, that they're going to be a leg up when they get out here to the workforce. Because one of the things that I try to tell people is our students are no longer competing amongst their peers right now. They're competing against the rest of the world. So how do we train up our youth in order to be able to have a leg to stand on? And so that's one of the things that I really take pride in.
Yeah, we agree with that.
Thank you. Well, besides my 2-year-old son, he makes me really happy. But really, what really makes me happy and brings me so much joy, so I have a goal this year to create 221 hotel owners and investors. And so far, probably created about 10 to 12 investors, about close to 13 investors so far. And I'm working on something that'll help me get to my goal. So the fact that people now, they're coming up to me, they're reaching out to me or contacting me, and they're saying, because of you, I can now own a hotel. I wanted to own a hotel, but I didn't know that it was possible. I didn't see anybody who looked like me to own a hotel. I didn't see a hotel owner who was approachable. So that brings me joy, and it lights a fire, and I've realized that what I'm doing is larger than me. Right, I'm bringing attention to, because right now there's less than 1 or 2% of the hotels in the United States are owned by African Americans, and so my goal is to help change that and to help increase that percentage. So that's what makes me happy, that people are actually investing, that people are actually looking to diversify their portfolio, and they're looking to create wealth for themselves, but create generational wealth for their family. And I'm glad that I'm able to provide education for those folks who are looking to diversify. So that way, because my goal is to help people to become successful hotel owners. I just don't want people to become investors of hotel. I want them to become successful and profitable, right? That's the goal. So the fact that people are taking the education, they're learning, and they're actually investing, and they're making the right decisions and taking on the right investments, and they're able to see. So when I hear years from now that they actually either owned or invested, that's just bringing me a lot of joy, and it's making me feel like that my 14 years of hard work, tears and sweat and pain and suffering, it's all worth it if I can just get one person, one African American, male or female, to become a hotel owner.
All right, and thank you all once again. And thank you for tuning in today. This is the Neighborhood Watch podcast. Please like and review wherever you listened or heard this podcast. And once again, I want to give a special shout out to my guest today for coming out and taking out time to talk. And I'll have links in the show notes about how to get in contact with them, as well as what firms that they represent. And so thank you once again. Please like and subscribe wherever you heard this podcast.